His Eminence Shahzada Sahib, my Lord Bishop of Birmingham, Lord Qurban, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum, good evening, Shalom, and if there are any Hindus, Namaskar, and I was expecting Sarvata Singh here, and I'll anyway say Sasrikar. Now, I've been embarrassed by the words which have been spoken about me. I felt like closing my ear, but I'd like to say something about my wife who runs my parliamentary office, and I will embarrass her by saying that when I became a peer, somebody said to me, now you are a peer, your wife will be a lady. And my answer was, she's always been a lady. It's been said that behind every successful man is a woman. I say correction. My answer is, besides every successful man is a woman. Now, I had the privilege of meeting Pir Sahib, His Holiness, a few weeks ago. And I was most impressed by his positive views, by his vision. He certainly is a man of vision. He talked about empowerment of women, a subject very, very dear to my heart. He talked about educating the women. He talked about Muslims entering politics. And unfortunately, there have been some misguided Muslims who have said to me, they don't refer to me as Lord Sheikh. I'm saying my name is Mohamad Sheikh. Don't refer to me as Lord Sheikh. And he's talked about Muslims not entering politics, which is wrong, which is of course what Pir Sahib has said. Now, I want to say also that he is a man of very, very strong family values. Undoubtedly, the Shahzada Sahib is here, and his lovely daughter, Lady Sohana, is here, and initially we had this beautiful naat from the Shahzada Sahib, and it touched my heart. He was speaking from the heart, and you could see he was putting feelings into what he was saying. And the words were words of wisdom. In fact, I think one or two perhaps we might have been a little bit emotional because of what he was saying. Now, I think before I say things, obviously I want to say one or two things. But we were having a discussion earlier on with my Lord the Bishop of Birmingham, and we were talking about perhaps putting forward a conference. And we are both of the same view that we've got to talk about action. How do we involve other people? How do we make this interfaith dialogue a reality? Because it's more than words. And what the bishop said to me was music to my ears, and I will say what he said later on, but I'd like to say to people here, it's important that we actually implement ideas which are going to work rather than words. Now, before I say other things, I'd like to read out what I have written here. And that is, I'll begin by saying that I was brought up in Uganda, where there are people of different racial and religious groups. At school, my friends included a Jew boy whose family came from India. My best friend actually was a Sikh. And this is the reason why I have a passion to ensure that people live in harmony and people love each other as much as I can. I learned to speak several languages. In fact, my father was a community leader, and as a young boy, I visited the various places of the world. And I think we've got to respect religious beliefs of others. Now, as has been mentioned in the introduction of a conservative peer, I'm very active in the House of Lords, but I like to say that I've quoted the Holy Quran and sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's important, it's imperative that we Muslims should tell the world about the positive side of Islam. What's Islam all about? And I'll touch on these subjects later on in my talk. But as has been mentioned earlier on, I am chairman of Conservative Muslim Forum. Of course, we have a political agenda, the very word conservative, but we are actively involved in promoting interfaith dialogue and harmony between various racial and religious groups. And in the room here, we've got Dr. Hussain, who chairs our health group. In fact, he did hold a meeting last week, and we got Councillor Bhatti and the rising star, Councillor Rabia Bhatti. And I was giving a talk, and I said that Martin Luther King 30 years ago talked about a dream. And I have a dream that in my lifetime I can see a young Muslim and now going up the ladder and becoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So Rabia, that should be your ambition. We will all back you. Now, at all our meetings, at Conservative Muslim Forum meetings, we invite people of all faiths and religion, and membership of the forum is open to everybody. I'm not promoting Conservative Muslim Forum, I'm just giving the idea, the concept of what we are trying to achieve. I believe that there are more similarities between people than differences. And we should highlight the similarities, and I'll come back to one or two points we mentioned earlier on. We should highlight the similarities between people so that we can build closer links between communities. I believe that we must have this dialogue, and I believe that lack of misunderstanding leads to suspicions and divisions between people. And I think these points have been coming out in one or two of the speakers, and that is misunderstanding causes problems. But we not only have got to tolerate, but we need to accept the beliefs of all communities. And it gives me great pleasure to speak at this event, which seeks to break barriers and build bridges between our various communities. Events like this play an important role in affirming and celebrating Britain's status as a diverse and multicultural society. Mutual understanding, respect, and interfaith dialogue are essential if we are to coexist peacefully. Islam teaches us to celebrate the difference and diversity which God has created in our world. And my sister referred to this point earlier on, and it's in the Holy Quran, Surah 49, Ayat 13. It is written, and that's of course the words of Allah. O mankind, we have created you for a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know one another. Verily, the most honourable amongst you in the sight of Allah is he who has piety and righteousness. So despite this demonization, and a couple of speakers have already alluded to this, Islam has a long and proud history of tolerance and respect for people of all faiths. In the Holy Quran is written, let there be no compulsion in religion. And this has been manifest in Muslim civilizations throughout history. Now, in regard to suicide bombing, Islam forbids suicide bombing. I've said this in the House of Lords, and I'll quote what I said in the House of Lords. In the Holy Quran is written, whoever kills a human being, it is as though he has killed all mankind. And whoever saves a human life, it is as though he has saved all mankind. I'll say to my Jewish friend, this is very similar to what is written in Talmud. Talmud says the same thing. Do you remember, did you see Schindler's List? Do you see when these people were released, they make a gold ring. Is that right? And on the back of the gold ring, this is written. If you save one life, it is as you have said they want. Now, I visited Jerusalem not very long ago, and I want to mention the first Jerusalem Declaration. The first Jerusalem Declaration. Because in the 7th century, the Muslims were victorious at the Battle of Yarmouk, and they conquered Jerusalem. The leaders of the city asked the Muslim generals that they will surrender the city to the leader of the Muslims, and thus we call it Khalif Umar, traveled to Jerusalem. Now it was Asad time. Probably those of you may actually know of this true story. It was Asad time. And the Khalifa Umar wanted to pray. And the Christian leaders said to the Khalifa Umar, they were actually in the church of Holy Sajjah. Khalifa Umar said, I want to say my salat. And the Christian leaders said, you can say the salat in the church. He said, no. If I say my salat in the church, Muslims will convert this church into a mosque. What did Khalifa? Man of wisdom. He went to the courtyard and he prayed in the courtyard. And on the spot, even now, if you go to Jerusalem, you'll see there's a mosque. I have visited Jerusalem recently, and on the outside of the mosque, there is some excerpts of the Jerusalem Declaration. When the Muslims and this declaration gave freedom, gave everybody to the right to practice their religion. So that is the greatness of what Islam is all about. Acceptance of all religions, and that's actually incorporated in the Jerusalem Declaration. Now, we've come here from abroad. This is a Christian country. But I'd like to mention that when Muslims were persecuted, they went to Abyssinia, and the king gave them something. They gave them refuge. And that's, of course, the very fact. Even Islam had just been born, but the Christian emperor gave succor, gave refuge to the Muslims. Now, Islam is one of the Abrahamic religions, and we believe that the prophets of Allah include Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jacob, and Jesus. And Islam, in fact, regards Christians and Jews as people of the book. And Muslims believe that the books of Allah are the Quran, the Torah, the Gospel, and Psalms of David. The Quran also mentions scrolls of Abraham. Now, I might say that the Holy Quran has an entire chapter which is titled Maryam, Mary, Mother of Jesus. And my fellow Conservative Muslim Forum executive members will remember that. Not very long ago, I had an event where, as the Imam recited the Holy Quran, we recited, our Imam, in fact we got a voluntary Imam who was my chief of staff, he recited Surah Maryam. And Christians came to see me, Jews came to see me. He said, well, Lord Sheikh, we don't know that on your holy book, in the Holy Quran, there's a chapter on Hazrat, on Mary, Mother of Jesus, which also talks about the birth of Jesus. Now, I have written some more, but I'll cut it out because obviously I was ad-libbing now. Let me talk about what's been discussed today. To start with, as I said, we had that lovely knot recited beautifully, touched us all. Then we had our friend from American Embassy, Eric Glee, and I was pleased to hear from him that the United States government, United States Embassy, supports interfaith dialogue. And this is particularly under President Obama, this is indeed very much evident, and that because they want to bring people together. In fact, we are sending a delegation of youngsters. When is that date, Sheikh? September, November, to United Kingdom. because a big one, to America, I'm sorry, to America, because they want these youngsters in America and our youngsters to engage and interact. So we had this short talk by Eric Lee. Then we had the talk from Lady Suhana Rahman, who talked about interfaith dialogue and protection of environment. This is something very dear to my heart, because our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, talked about protecting the environment 1400 years ago. And Hazrat Abu Bakr commanded his armies, never harm women, never harm the vegetation and the trees. So even going back 1400 years, our Holy Prophet and the Khalifas were talking about protecting the environment. I'm pleased that you mentioned this point. And thank you very much indeed for giving us the insight into Eidgah Sharif, and obviously, your discussions with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and you had Bishop here who also alluded to that discussion. Archbishop of Canterbury we hear him in the House of Lords from time to time. Indeed, it's a pity that he's retiring, but the thing he's done a marvelous job, amongst other things, building bridges between the various faiths. Now, Rashid Saad made a very relevant point. I'm going to cut out what I've written, and I'm just going to pick up on the salient points which you made. And you made this point about social media. Yes, you made the point that we can use social media to our advantage. And that is so very, very important, because you can reach out to a lot of people. This is the modern technology. If you see how I mentioned Obama's success was partly the fact that he used social media to our advantage. Something we need to think about. And this is something which a positive action can be taken in reaching out and talking to people of different faiths, different religions. And you referred to Archbishop of Canterbury's visit to Pakistan. And he also talked about visit to and from Pakistan. And obviously, I'm sorry, I'm cutting across what you're saying, Bishop. But anyway, the main point you made was the point regarding social media, something to think about. My Lord the Bishop, thank you for your talk. And you also alluded to visit of the Bishop of Pakistan and visit to and from Pakistan. And you said about there are always common concerns about situation in Pakistan and UK. And I asked His Holiness the Peace Harp about these blasphemy laws, which do cause me concern, really cause me concern. In fact, the chairman of a youth group was there. And you remember when the politician was murdered, this young man had threats, isn't it, Sheikh? He had threats, not only in Pakistan, but here as well. So there are bad people who want to destroy this concept, this belief in people being together. Now, my Lord Bishop, you mentioned about practical programs. And you mentioned about feast. And you mentioned about near neighbor. I think those are, again, actions. Some people can do, and maybe one day, as I said to you earlier on, my Lord the Bishop, that I'd like to see what is being done. I sit here, I'm a businessman, I'm all those things, but I'd like to see how things are done on the ground. I'm not a foot soldier, but I'd like to see how these foot soldiers talked about getting people together. This is so very, very vital. And therefore, maybe one day, I'd like to visit Birmingham, and perhaps we can talk about this idea you talked about. And you said about being present with one another and engaging with one another. I like that expression, Bishop. Being present with one another and engaging with one another is such a marvelous idea. Now, Robin Marsh has talked about sharing amongst people. Humanity is one family under God. What marvelous! Humanity is one family under God. And he talked about United Nations, international organizations being involved in this work. In fact, that's something that Sheikh would be discussed. We had those people come to see me. We had people from America and from Nigeria and from Israel. It's an idea, I think, which perhaps needs to be given further consideration. My friend Lord Qurban is eloquent as ever, and he talked about diversity in action. And he talked about proud of our diversity. He talked about excellent community relations. And he talked about personal work. I'd like to say that before our proceeding in the House of Lords, we have an Anglican bishop who reads at prayer. And I do attend bishops. Lord Bishop, I do attend. Because it's one God. Undoubtedly. I do attend whenever I can. Especially if I'm asking a question, it was if I can get there early, listen to the prayers, and also have a secure seat so I can ask my question. So undoubtedly, this is talked about one universal family. You know. And I totally disagree with anybody criticizing this practice. I certainly would like this practice to continue. Now, Jack Lyons started with a marvelous prayer, undoubtedly. And you talked about, I like the story about two synagogues. Can I have your permission to cut them?
It's not new.
Undoubtedly. And you talked about need to understand ourselves, self-examination, community commonalities. That's the point I was making in my submission. The commonality, it's so very important, commonality amongst people. And you talked about mankind welfare trust, something positive being done. And there's obligation for us to undertake work. I mean, in our religion, Islam, as you know, we have to give zakat. And obviously there are similar concepts in Christianity and for Judaism. And this is well before welfare state. There was no welfare state 1400 years ago. I can understand why zakat is one of the pillars of Islam. And zakat should be used not only to help Muslims, but all the communities. I emphasize this. There are some misguided people who said to me, oh Lord Sheikh, zakat is only relevant to Muslims. No. Zakat is relevant and should be utilized for the welfare and advancement of all the communities. Now, you talked about Harrow, something practical being done. You talked about visiting people at home. You talked about working center. And you talked about helping bereavement, which is so very, very important. And your idea, Jack, announced a day for blood donation. Now, I was brought from Africa. There's a saying in Africa that is say, we may be black, we may be yellow, we may be Chinese, whatever, but our blood is red. Very, when you say that, an educated mountain man said that to me once when I was climbing the mountain in Kenya. To say our blood is the same color. So that concept, Jack, is a marvelous one, and I hope that we can implement it. Sister Julie Sadiq, we talked about need for action, and you alluded to His Holiness appreciation of the family and asking for a lady to speak. Talked about obviously the need for women to coming to the front, and this does annoy me when you get a situation where women are not allowed to participate in certain masjids. This is wrong. I went to Egypt. I was chairing a meeting where there were Salafis, and one Salafi said to me, Lord Sheikh, under Islam, a woman cannot be the employer. The man is unlawful for a man to work under a woman. So I asked him one question. Who did our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who did he work for? So this distortion, total distortion. Empowerment of women, education of women, and that's so very, very much important. And Sister, you talked about Muslim and Jews getting together. Need to challenge extremism, particularly from the far right, Eidgah and that. And you talked about Ramazan Olympics. You talked about friendship, respect, and excellence. And need for the good work to be carried out. Dr. Khan Sahib just made 4 or 5 points. I'm only going to pick on 1 point. And that is, you talked about being a legal man, you talked about legislation which will make it unlawful for discrimination against Muslims in Judaism, something I think we need to think about. So that's the point you made. You made 4 other points because of constraint of time. I can't. So, but you said yourself. Imam Sahib talked about dialogue, again education of women, and you talked about big conference in London, undoubtedly. But I would like to say, we're going to arrange a conference. Let's talk about action. Let's talk about success stories from different parts of the country, where you have my Lord, the Bishop of Bradford, and other Bishop of Birmingham. So we need to talk about actually how people are implementing these ideas, which are producing positive results. Very, very important. My dear friend Sarwar Sahib, you touched upon important, I could have written your words, and that is the role of the media. Now you talked about marvelous place to live in, and you talked about media, and we are proud of the fact that we have a democratic country. We live in a democratic country with freedom of media. But I would like to say that I always said, I've said that on numerous occasions, let newspapers, let the media act responsibly. Responsible action, rather than just picking on few people here and there. Nearly all the Muslims are peaceful people. They contribute to advancing well-being of the country, and obviously that's wrong for the media to pick up on demonizing of Islam. I can give a talk about an hour on this subject, but again, I will say you made a very relevant point. Sarwar Sahib, undoubtedly, very wise words. Now, Rabia Bhatti, of course, marvelous Rabia Bhatti. You heard her CV, and undoubtedly at the age of 20, she has achieved so much really in her lifetime. People don't achieve. You talked about society built on honesty, compassion, and generosity. And you talked about religion and society not being separate. Very important point, really. Religion and society. You made a very, very, very relevant point. You talked about shared hope and values and challenging misunderstanding, which I think I mentioned other speakers have also picked up on this point. Living together, and you talked about inviting others into our homes and lives. So those are my points. And again, Your Holiness, P. Sahib, the work you do is indeed very much appreciated. As I said, you're a man of vision, but you're also doing positive action, helping many. So very, very important. You are not only doing these things in Pakistan, but in this country as well, which is to be appreciated, and that is something I do. I'm not wearing a hat, but it's my hat off. Your Holiness. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.